Hello, in this dev diary I want to take a look at the character movement for low resolutions and in particular take a look at how to solve the problem of doors. So to begin with, let's take a look at what we've actually got. So the scenario that we have to deal with is we have our door, and in this case we're dealing with a door that is in two sections. So we have a door that looks something like this. So we've got our two sections of our door, and then we've got our character, and our character needs to move through this door. And we want to, we've got to deal with a bunch of situations. We don't want the character so that they're hitting into the actual door. So we don't want them to collide with it. We don't want them to end up going and walking through the door. We want, it to behave sort of as we would hope, a character would look. We want it to look reasonable. We want it to actually look like they're moving sort of properly. So what we want is essentially our character. If they're coming from over here, we want our character to come along and to go through the midpoint, and then if they're heading over here, we want them to continue like that. Now potentially we might want them to sort of shortcut this a bit, but essentially this is the kind of movement that we want. We want them to move through the center of the door. We don't want them to move too close to the sides, and we want to make it so that the door stays open the whole time that they're moving through. So there's a few things that we can do for this. Now, one of the catches that we need to deal with is if our character is here and we're wanting them to head over here, when the door is closed, the navigation mesh, assuming we're using a navigation mesh, will actually be cut. There won't be a solid navigation mesh from one side to the other. So we can bridge that gap using something called an off-mesh link. So what we have for an off-mesh link is we create a marker on either side. And so our navigation mesh might be sort of covering these areas here. This is going to be our nav mesh. So our nav mesh is covering here, and we'll also have our nav mesh on this side. Now what our off-mesh links do is our off-mesh links, they bridge from one side to the other. So they allow our character to move in either direction. So it gives it a connection that's there even when the nav mesh is broken. Now, when the door opens, the navigation mesh is going to get linked up and the character can walk through. But we generally want to have the character actually move on that off-mesh link so that we can carefully control the movement, because we want the doors to reliably stay open until the character's done with it. And now what we're using here for the doors, it actually could be used for anything where the character's performing some more complex movement. We could be using this for a character jumping, so it's kind of good to set up a system where while they're going through the door, we fully control the movement of them. But that raises a few sort of difficulties. If we use Unity's default approach and we just actually try and move between these using its built-in stuff, you'll see glitches in the movement speed, and the character won't move sort of smoothly, and the character will tend to actually clip through the door. The behavior's not good. So what we actually do is, if I draw another door here, what we end up doing is we actually set up so that we have a more sort of controlled approach. So if this is our doorway, then we have our off-mesh link, and we divide our approach for this. We divide how the AI works with this into 3 stages. So our first step with this is we divide it into the stages. So the first stage is getting the character onto that start point. Then our second stage is moving to our end, and then finally our third stage is leaving the end of the off-mesh link and continuing on with our normal movement. So let's take a look at how that ends up actually looking. So if we go to Unity, firstly we can actually see our off-mesh links here. So there's an off-mesh link on either side of the door, and these are positioned such that if we look at the navigation mesh, they are not right on the edge of it. You want to have a bit of a sort of buffer there between the door and your off-mesh links, so that it's not too close to it, so that you can actually have enough time for the character to turn to face the correct sort of directions. And you'll notice that the door itself then actually has a off-mesh link added on it with our start and end points, and I'm not changing the cost, and it's currently bidirectional. Now these off-mesh links, you can actually lock them if you need, which can be quite handy. So in terms of from a code point of view, what happens? So in my update for my agent, what I've set up is I actually have 3 different statuses that represent those different sort of stages. So I know if I'm not on a link, if I'm moving to the start, or if I'm on a link. So I'm constantly looking to see if the agent is saying, are they on an off-mesh link? So if I'm either already got the enumeration set to say that I'm not on a link, so I'm already partway through the process, or if I've suddenly said that I'm on a link, then I run the off-mesh behavior. Now that, in terms of what it does, it divides it into our 3 stages. So if we're not on the link and we've just become to be on the link, then we handle this enter stage. So our starting point, we're updating our enumeration. I want to turn off auto repath. Auto traversal of off-mesh links, I've actually already defaulted to off. So one of the things I do here is I retrieve my door. Once I've retrieved the door, I force it to open, and then I tell the door that it's being used by the AI. Because what that means is the door won't close then, as long as the AI is using it. So rather than relying on trigger volumes that I use for when the player's going through the door, I find that with characters moving through the door, it's better to take more direct control. I also grab my start and end locations, because one of the things is I get the start and end pos, and I might need to swap those. Now I'm not actually sure if I entirely need this, but I put the swapping in just to cover in case I did need it. And I also pre-calculate a bunch of things, because my character walking through this, I want them to face a particular direction. And obviously I want them to face the direction they're heading, so I calculate that rotation. To make sure that the character's speed stays consistent, I actually store that speed, so that when the character's moving along the off-mesh link, I can actually move them at the same speed they entered it. I store my direction, and because at the moment I only support doors, if it wasn't a door, then I actually exit out. Now when I'm actually on the off-mesh link, as I'm moving towards the start, my logic is fairly straightforward. With moving towards the start, I handle it accepting that it's at that point via 2 criteria. It can either be that it's gotten very close to it, or if it's a slightly larger distance, but is in front of the off-mesh link. So essentially, if it's in this section here, then I allow it. That sort of handles if we've got a character that's starting here, that they can actually come to this point, and when they're at this point, then they can actually continue through. So we check it in those 2 ways. Now you notice I'm updating the current speed here, because what I'm actually doing is if the agent needs to turn a very large amount, then I actually ramp the speed down. That allows the agent to have more time to actually get to the point that it needs to. So if it's got a large rotation, it slows itself down. When it's moving on the link, the process is largely similar, except that for reaching the end, what you'll notice is if I used similar criteria to this, if I detected that I reached the end just with a sort of threshold distance, or because I was in front of this point, what I would actually find is the character will have a bit of a glitch. There'll be a slight sort of teleport at the end. So to mitigate that, I actually check, have I reached the exact position? Which, because of the manner in which I'm doing this movement, that's actually valid. So once I've finished, I can grab the door and tell it that it's done, so the door will now be able to close. I can restore all my speed information and tell it that I'm finished with the off-mesh link and tell it to resume. And that's essentially it. Now in a bunch of other areas, I check if it's moving on an off-mesh link. For example, I have logic that makes the character's head and so forth turn particular directions. I have custom handling there for when I'm on an off-mesh link. So let's actually take a look then at how this looks. So if I run it up, which it does take a little bit to load, this level is, even though it's a test level, it's quite a large test level, but that's fine. So what we'll see once it loads up, because this AI is currently set up to always follow the player, which I do recommend if you are actually setting up so that you have a test level, or if you are trying to solve a bunch of AI issues, setting up so you've got a test level is a really good idea. Because what this allows me to do is I can go here and grab my player, and then I can take my player and I can move them around, and I can see that the AI isn't really moving until I move a bit away, but then I can jump my player out here, so my AI has to go through the door. I can see that they get to the point, they turn, door stays open. Now they do overshoot a little bit. I need to actually adjust the steering behavior for when the character gets off of the link, but that's actually a separate issue. And the AI manages to move through, turns nicely, does end up sort of sidestepping because their path is a little bit wonky there. I'm actually going to look at some other changes I can make from a steering point of view to help with that. But the actual movement is robust. So while there are some glitches with the movement, in particular when it gets off that off mesh, it doesn't teleport, it consistently gets through the door, and the rest of this is going to be fixable with steering behavior changes. So essentially that's how I've set up the behavior for the doors. And this is something you can use for other ones. So use off-mesh links on either side of the item, and then split your movement into 3 stages. Getting to the start, moving on the off-mesh, and then transitioning off of the off-mesh link. While you could use volumes to make sure things like doors are kept open, I generally find better behavior from not doing that. I find actually just telling the thing that you're interacting with, whether it's a door or another item, that you tell it that an AI is interacting with it, that tends to work better. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, then give it a thumbs up. And if you want to hear more, then subscribe. But until next time, bye.